All right. A week of learning Yossi and Chippy Peleg in memory of his mother, Sprinza Basakiva. Marcia and Gary Schrager in memory of her father, Shmuel Ben Meir. And that's it. And also, since today is Memorial Day, we acknowledge the bravery and heroism of those persons who died in the various wars that bring us to our great country. All right, so before we go into the next Mishnah, I'll just give a few background points. We know we've been learning, or we went away from it for a while, but we had learned in the first parak about all the types of cases where you can do either yibum or chalitza. There are other cases where you do not do either if it's an erva, and there are other cases where you must do chalitza, you may not do yibum. We also learned, like around Membeis, that there are ervas that the Torah does not consider an erva, but for whatever reason, the Rabbanan made into an erva. That's a shniya. For example, if your father's mother is an erva, but your mother's mother is not. So the rabbis came along and said, you can't marry your mother's father, your mother's mother. Okay, that's one piece of background. I guess, okay. So I covered that there are dioraisa and one last point. Everybody except Rebbe Akiva holds that a marriage contracted even though in the face of a lav. For example, a Kohen marrying a divorcee. So Rabbi Akiva says it's the same level as the Kores level marriages of a real erva, and it's not chal. But everybody else says you're not supposed to have conducted that marriage, but it is chal. So that is our Mishnah is now going to be dealing with circumstances where the marriage is, I'm going to use the word illegitimate, but what I mean by that will be that it is a lav marriage, and yet it is a valid marriage. Okay, so I don't know what word to say, so I'm going to use the word illegitimate. So the Mishnah is broken into various segments. The first part of the Mishnah will give us a klal that women who fall to yibum can fit into one of four categories. The next section of the Mishnah will spell out the various cases that are mentioned in the generality. And then the Mishnah will wrap up with what happens if it's not a biblical issue, but it's a rabbinic issue. Okay, so that's the format of the Mishnah. I think that Hakdama will help us understand it. And this is a whole cup kind of part of the Gemara. As I commented to Mel, it's like the 16 brothers cases with the charts. All right. Yesh mutaros leba'aleihen v'asuros leyevameihen. There's a category of women who had 100% legitimate marriages, but there is an impediment to her yavam. Now, in all these cases, the husband dies, right? So there is an impediment to the Yavam marrying her, and he has to do chalitza. Okay, that's group one. Group two, mutaros liyavamehem v'asuros leba'aleihen. Group two is there's no impediment to the Yavam doing Yibum with her if he wishes, but she should not have lechatchila been married to the husband in the first place. It was a lav marriage. The third category, muteres the elu la'elu, that there's no problem with her marrying the first fellow, and there's no problem with his surviving brother marrying her when the husband dies. So that's normal cases, right? And then the fourth category is asurus la'elu la'elu. She should not lechatchila have married her husband. That was a lav marriage. And she's not allowed to marry her yavam. He has to do chalitza. Or in some cases, perhaps there would be no chalitza at all if it's an erva case. Okay. That's the end of the klal, the generality. Now we're going to go into specifics. The elu mutaros leba'aleihen v'asuros liyavameihen. This is now going to be a list of women who were able to marry their husbands with no impediment, but she is not allowed to live with the yavam. He must do chalitza. He cannot do yibum. Okay, and we're going to go through a list. Kohen hediot shenasa es almana. A Kohen, a stam Kohen, marries a widow. That's permitted. V'yesh lo ach Kohen gadol. But the dead husband has a surviving brother who's the Kohen gadol. Now, he's not allowed to marry an almana. So she was mutter to her husband, but usher to her yavam. Okay? Another case. Halal shenasak sheira v'yesh lo ach kosher. A person who is a halal, that means a woman, we know what, who marries a kosher woman. So we have a Kohen whose father was not supposed to marry the woman he did marry. So that boy is a halal. Now the halal marries a perfectly kosher woman. That's fine. However, by living with her, she becomes a halala. So now his kosher Kohen brother, who's not a halal, like the first marriage, was a perfectly good marriage. And then they're old, he marries a widow and whatever. So there are two siblings by the father. One's a halal, one's kosher. And she can't go to the yavam. That's case, okay? Now, next case. Yisrael shenasa bas Yisrael v'yesh lo ach mamzer. The father, in addition to having that regular children, fooled around on the side, has a mamzer son. That's the son by the same father. He's a yavam. But the girl, who's a kosher girl, can't marry. Now she's a kosher widow, can't marry a mamzer. That's another case. Mamzer shenasa mamzeres. A mamzer is allowed, it's a kosher marriage, to marry a mamzeres. But he has a kosher brother. V'yesh lo ach Yisrael. He has a kosher brother. The kosher brother can't marry a mamzeres, even though the widow mamzeres. So that's yet another case. All of these are examples. Mutairos leba'aleihen. Their initial marriages were 100%. V'asuros liyavamehen, but they may not marry the fellow who is their yavam. Okay, that's category one. V'elu mutaros liyavamehen v'asuros leba'alehen. Now we're going to have a list of women who should not have married their husbands, but they did, and now they're widows, and they were not kosher to their husbands, but they are 100% kosher to the Yavam. Okay? Kohen Gadol shekidesh es almana v'yesh lo ach Kohen hedya. We're going to ask why we asked this question, but the Kohen Gadol has not yet done anything wrong when he only has erusin with the almana. The avera is when they have nisuyin and when they live together. So the Kohen Gadol does an illegitimate erusin with a widow and then drops dead. And now the sibling of the now deceased Kohen Gadol takes the woman, she's a Yavama to him. So he should not have had the erusin with her, but she could not, but it's kosher to the second guy. Now, the reason it uses Kidesh here is because if they did do Nisuyin, should be a Halala and would not be able to marry the brother, right? Kosher shenasa Halala, v'yesh lo ach Halal. A kosher Kohen marries a Halala and then dies. Now she's a Halala. His surviving sibling is a Halal because his father married someone he shouldn't have. So that's a kosher marriage. A Halala and a Halal is a kosher marriage. Next case. Yisrael shenasa mamzeres v'yesh lo ach mamzer. So the husband was not allowed to marry the girl. She's a mamzeres. He did anyway. Now he's dead. So she's still a mamzeres, and he has a surviving sibling who's a mamzer. So that's a kosher marriage. Okay, next case. Mamzer shenasa bas Yisrael v'yesh lo ach Yisroel. A mamzer illegitimately marries a kosher girl. Now he dies. She's still a kosher girl. She can marry his surviving brother. That's a kosher marriage. So the initial marriage, no. The second marriage, yes. Okay? All of these cases, mutoros le-yavamehen, they're kosher to their yavam. The asuros leba'alehen, and it's a law for them to have been married in the first place. The third category, the elu asuros le'elu v'elu. Here, you're not allowed to have married the first husband, even though you did, and you're not allowed to marry the yavam. So at best, he has to do chalitza. Okay. Kohen Gadol shenasets almana v'yesh lo ach Kohen Gadol oy kohen. Okay, that first part of the case. Ruvain is the Kohen Gadol. He marries an almana. Now we're going to, and then he dies. Now, immediately upon his death, before the surviving sibling can deal with the almana, the surviving sibling gets elected Kohen Gadol. So now the first Kohen Gadol wasn't allowed to marry this lady because she's not a basula. And the second Kohen Gadol can't marry this lady because she's an almana. So that's asur lezeh lezeh. And even if he's a Kohen, Kohen Hedyot, even if the surviving sibling is not a Kohen Gadol, she's a halala, so he can't marry her. Okay? Kosher shenasa halala v'yesh lo ach kosher. A perfectly good Kohen who marries a halala, she's already a halala, like she's the product, she's the female product of an illegitimate Kohanic marriage. And he has another, and his surviving brother is kosher. So again, the halala can't marry either one. Okay, next case, Yisrael shenasa mamzeres v'yeshlo ach Yisrael. He wasn't allowed to marry the mamzeres, and his surviving brother is also not allowed to marry the mamzeres. Mamzer shenasa bas Yisrael v'yeshlo ach mamzer. The first mamzer wasn't allowed to marry the Bas Yisrael, and the second mamzer is also not allowed to marry the Bas Yisrael. Okay, asuras le'elu le'elu. So in that list of cases, neither marriage, the first marriage was illegitimate, and the rabbis do not allow the second marriage to happen. Next case. Okay, I think that's all the case. Okay. Vishar kol hanashim, the fourth case, where with both marriages are fine, right? Vishar kol hanashim, everybody else the Mishnah can think of, Gemara is going to change this, but at this point, everybody else, their marriages and the Yavam and the Yibum are both kosher. Muteres lebalehan ula Yavamehim. Okay. Now, in all, those are all the Eraisa issues. Now we're going to deal with what if either the husband or the potential new husband are shnios. That means that it's a rabbinically invented erva. Okay, shnios midivrei seifrim. If it's a secondary erva based on a rabbinic decree, shenia leba'al v'lo shenia leyavam. What happens if the initial marriage was rabbinically forbidden because of the relationship is a shnia, like the man marries his mother's mother, okay? But his sibling isn't related to that woman at all because his sibling is from yet another mother, right? So in that case, shnia leba'al, v'lo shnia leyavam, she's secondary to the husband, but not to the yavam, asura lebalu muteris leyavam. She should not have married her first husband, but the second husband can do yibum. Okay, now, shnia liyavam v'lo shnia leba'al. You just reverse the case. She married legitimately her grandson, her grandson, maternal grandson, but the yavam is she's an erva to the yavam because the yavam is her grandson, but both sides. You understand the case?
All right.
If you don't understand the case, raise your hand so I know you don't. Okay, so in that case, asura liyavam umuteris lebal. The first marriage is fine. The second marriage, the rabbis would not allow to take place. Now, shnia lezelazeh, she's related on a rabbinic level to both men. So that would be asur lezeh ulezeh. Okay? And then, of course, you need not state, she's not related to either one of them. She's kosher to either one of them. So that's the rabbinic level. Now we're going to go back and we're going to say, what are the implications of marrying someone that is an erva? So now we're going to have an interesting situation where the penalties for violating the din, the rabbanan of a shniya, are significantly worse than the penalties of a lav marriage, the eraisa. Okay, so here's the deal. The woman married a man who is a shnia to her, right? Ein lo ksuba. She cannot collect her ksuba. Now, included in the ksuba, we learned this earlier, is tzon barzel. Which is property that is evaluated at the time of the marriage. It's a price tag is affixed to it. They appraise it. At the end of the marriage, she gets that exact dollar amount, not necessarily the property back. Since there's a Gemara in Ksubas that already taught us that a shnia doesn't get the 200 zuz, the regular ksuba, the Meforshim explained that this statement, ksuba here, is including tzon barzel. So she's knast that she doesn't even get back her own property's value because she should not have married this guy. Velo peiros, on the nichsei malug, where the husband collects the peiros. So there's a din. If she's kidnapped by goyim, the husband is obligated to redeem her, to pay a ransom to get her back. The way he does that, he's not a jerk. He first sells her property and uses her property. He sells the nuchsei malug, uses her property to pay off the kidnappers, and he buys her back from them. If it's a secondary erva, rabbinically forbidden marriage, the Bezdin would not allow him to sell the property to pay her off. So the implications you'll leave to your imagination. V'lo mezainos. When you marry a woman, you obligate yourself to feed and clothe her and house her. Here, if it's a secondary marriage, and let me give into, so let's say Shmuel marries Rivka and Shmuel disappears. So a Bezdin will go and sell property Shmuel owns to feed his family. Or the Bezdin will allow the woman to borrow money from somebody to feed herself. And if Shmuel ever comes back, the Bezdin will make him pay back the loan. In this case, they do not confiscate his estate, and they do not use his estate as collateral for her loan. She's on her own. Okay? V'lo ba'alois. All right. We had once before the widow who wanted her fancy coat she gave her husband. So if you bring tzon barzel clothing, men's clothing, into the marriage, it's part of the dowry, and the husband wears it out, the woman's entitled to the rags. Okay, I mean, in our world, a very old pair of torn-up jeans can go for $1,000 on eBay, but they're talking about using it as shmatis epis. She can't even get that back. That's how far Chazal go. But Vlad kosher, nevertheless, they do not knas her family. The children are kosher. V'kaifen oiso lahotze. And Bezdin would force this man, even physically, to give her a get. But the get is just a piece of paper. She doesn't get the ksuba. She doesn't get even back her property. Okay. Now, that was all rabbinic issues. But what if it's a diraisa issue? We're now going, it's A, B, B, A. We're now going back to the beginning of the Mishnah. Are there any consequences to the woman for engaging in a Torah law marriage? Almana l'kohen gadol, if an almana marries a kohen gadol, or a gerusha v'chalutza l'kohen hedyot, Those are examples of lav marriages. Mamzeres unesina Israel, a mamzeres or a questionable convert to a kosher fellow, okay, or the other way around, Bas Yisrael anasin or lemamzer, yesh lehem ksuba. They get their ksuba, and then the rest of the list. So paradoxically, the rabbinic marriage bans, the woman loses everything. But if it's just a lav marriage min haTorah, there is no financial penalty to the woman. End of the Mishnah. Now, the first question the Gemara is going to ask is, "My arya detane nyasa?" Why, in the very first case, does it say that the Kohen married a widow? Why didn't it say lisnei kiddush? He simply had erusin with her. So if the Kohen had just had erusin with her and she's a virgin, but they never actually lived together, she would still be forbidden. We learned this earlier to the Kohen Gadol. This would be a bigger chiddush. Why didn't it do that? The nasa, the reason it says nasa here, dahavile asavelo. All Yavam relationships are based on lo saseh, aseh lo doche lo saseh. You're not allowed to marry your sister-in-law. But if it's a Yavam case, there's an aseh, you have to do Yibam. So we say the aseh is doche lo saseh. As the hypothetical here is, the reason it says he married her is so it's two lavin. One, she's a widow, and two, she's not a virgin. So you have two losa says, and an asay is not doicha, two losa says. Okay? The havile asev loisa avol kidesh, if he only betrothed her, asi asev docha losa say, you would only have one and one, and it should be doicha. You could have a havamina that he should marry her. Vaha kula pirkin. Problem, that's a very good logical argument. The problem is every item in that first group is an aseh daichalos aseh possibility. And yet we say they do not do yibum. So even though logically it makes sense, practically speaking, you'd have to ask the question again and again and again and again, and it doesn't. Okay? So now what would be the, okay, did I read all the Lohokul of Pirkin? Aseh velo sasehu, every one of the cases are an aseh and a lo saseh. Velo aseh aseh v'docha lo saseh, and we don't say that the aseh pushes away the lo saseh. We say that she's forbidden to the yavam. So why do we have another reason? Mishum the kaboye lemisne seifa. The Mishnah will bring in the third category, Kohen Gadol Shenasa Es Almana. Okay, Dafka Nasa. There, as I explained when we did the Mishnah, you have to say Nasa because Kidesh would not have yet been the Avera. So the Shar Yechalala, because only if the Kohen Gadol actually lives with this widow does she become a halala. Avo kidei shayale. But if he only does erusin, then there's no problem because she's still a virgin. Okay? So tananami reisha nasa. So since case 3 has to use the word nasa, we're going to say in case 1 it wants to be parallel for mnemonic rationales. Okay. But the problem there is that was 1 and 3. What happened to case 2? The Tani Mishum Seifa. What about case two? Why do we pick case 3? Lisne Mishum Mitziosa. Why don't we make the language parallel to case 2? Kohen Gadol Shekidesh Es Almana V'yesh Lo Ach Kohen Hedyot. There it does use the word Kidesh. So back to the same argument, we could have just as easily made 1 and 2 use the same language. Ela Mishum Bas Bukta. The reason we use Nasa in case 1 is because the next part of case 1 says V'kavoa lemasne chalal shenasa kshera. A halal who marries a perfectly legitimate woman, and there you have to say nasa. Time the nasa shavia halala, because the only reason that she's forbidden to the yavam is because she did live with his brother illegitimately and become a halala. Aval kide shayale. But if they only did erusin, then it would have been no problem with the yavam marrying her. Okay, everybody got that? Now, when we talked about the normal Kohen, the Kohen Hedyot, who marries a widow, and her surviving sibling is the Kohen Gadol. What if I didn't say widow? What if I simply said a Kohen Hedyot gets married, he dies, and his brother is the Kohen Gadol? Implication is identical. She's an almana either way. Why did the Mishnah have to say that the Hedyot married an almana? So this is very tricky. I think I have it right, but I'm not sure. Okay? If you say kasavar haitana nisuyin rishonim mafilin, if you say we only think about the moment of the marriage, and that is what determines. This is a havamina that nobody holds. This is just a little intellectual exercise on the part of the Gemara, if I have it right. We make the determination at the moment of the marriage, meaning at the erusin phase when he gives her the ring or the money. She's a virgin. So we don't really care about the fact that they lived together for 10 years. The Kohen, it's that moment that determines the circumstance of Yavam. So when the Kohen Gadol comes to claim her, he can ignore the fact that she lived with his brother for 10 years, and he can marry her. That's the Havamina. That's what it means. So in order to preclude that bizarre Havamina that nobody would hold like, it says she was already a widow. Okay? If that's not clear, it's because it's not clear.
Yeah, not clear.
Okay. So now, next case. This was where the Gemara says that case, that idea is ridiculous. Harei chalal shenasa kshera. But the next part of the Mishnah talks about a halal who marries a perfectly valid woman. So if that same notion applied, v'lo amrin in nisuyin rishonim maflin, we do not pretend that we ignore the whole marriage. So that doesn't work. Ho vadai mishum seifa. So the reason why it made her a widow at the first marriage is to be parallel to the third case. Mishum de kaboye lamas nisa seifa, the third case. Kohen gadol shenasa es almana v'yesh lo ach kohen gadol o kohen hedyot. So since there, the Kohen Gadol had to be marrying a widow. To make it all easier to memorize, we used the word widow earlier too. That's the rationale. So Dafka Almana. So now in this third case, she's forbidden to the Yavam because she's a widow. Her husband died. Aval Besula Chaziale. But had she been a had she been a virgin, she would be fine for the Yavam. So Mishum Hachi Katani Almana. So it's to keep the parallels to case 3 that we started the discussion with, that we put in an Almana over here. Now, this is allegedly or presumptively an exhaustive list. And we've come up with this before. If I can find something that's not mentioned in the Mishnah, that Taka should have been mentioned in the Mishnah, I can debate the whole Mishnah. Unless Reuven, because I learned with him, can come up with a second thing or a third thing. And then we say, well, they put in some, they left out some. But you're not allowed to just put in everything but one. Okay, everybody remember that? So Maschif Rav Papa. Isa Lahai Techi Asa Rebbe Dimi Omer Rebbe Yochanan. If we hold like the statement of Rebbe Dimi when he visited Bavel, where he quotes Rebbe Yochanan, Mitzri Sheni Shenasa Mitzri Srishayna. Remember our Egyptians. The first door of Egyptian converts cannot marry regular Jews. The second door of Egyptian converts cannot marry regular Jews. The third door of Egyptian converts can marry regular Jews. What happens if there's a mixed marriage? A newly converted Egyptian woman marries a person born Jewish from Egyptian converts. In other words, a B man marries an A woman, if it's A, B, C. So remember, Rav Dimi said that the child goes after the mother and the child is a B baby, not a C baby. Right? We had that before. Mitzri Sheni Shanasa Mitzri Srishayna. Bana Sheni Have. The child of this mixed marriage, so to speak, is a Sheni. Okay, so listen in Nami. So the Mishnah should have mentioned the following case based on what the Gemara just reminded us is the rule. Mitzri Sheni Shanasa Shtei Mitzriyos, an Egyptian B. He's wealthy enough to marry 2 women. Now he's a B. He's not allowed to marry a regular Jewish girl. So he marries a B girl and he marries an A girl. Achas Rishona v'achas Shniya. Okay? V'hoyulo banim Rishona v'Shniya. And he has sons from both wives. So one of his sons is a C and can marry anybody. The other son is a B and cannot marry anybody. So that would be another case. Now, I'll just add here, Rashi, unlike all the other Rishonim, says that a C Egyptian cannot marry an A or B. He's 100% a Jew, and he's in the same cot as he's in the colony, can't marry an A or a B. The other Rishonim disagree with Rashi on that, but let's stick with Rashi. Ve'i nasav be or chayhu, if the 2 men marry people they're 100% able to marry, that means C marries a regular Jewish girl, and B marries another Egyptian convert, an A or a B, right? Now he dies. right? Sumutaris levalehen. He married another Egyptian, a second generation Egyptian convert. Va'asuris liyavamehen. But she cannot marry her brother's brother. Okay? Is that clear, folks? Okay, seems to be clear. Okay, the ipuch, the nisuk. And what if it went the other way around, that they married illegitimately? Okay, mutaras liyavamehen v'asuris lebalehen. So then you would have the opposite, the flip. She shouldn't have married her husband, but it's okay for her to marry the yavam. Okay, and then, or if they, what if they, okay, umutaris ve'elu le'elu giyaras. But either one of them could have married a non-Egyptian convert who's immediately able to marry the kahal, but she's still a convert, so the Egyptian can marry her. So asuras ve'elu le'elu. Okay, that would be the end of that. Now, what about another possibility where nobody can marry her? The first illegitimately, and the second is forbidden. Okay, isuras le'elu le'elu islandess. What if she's an islandess? Now, the first husband was not allowed to marry an islandess unless he had other children. So this is an illegitimate marriage. And the yavam can't marry the islandess because the pasuk says the purpose is to name the baby after the dead guy. And an islandess can't make a baby. So the Gemara answers, Tana v'shayir. It mentions some cases, it leaves out others. So now we ask, but what else did it leave out? My shayir v'hashayir. In order to legitimately leave these out, you have to come up with yet another. So shayir pitzuataka. Everybody thought we'd get past this. But no, somebody who has flawed genitalia, who's not allowed to marry. Okay, imashum psuadaka, if that's the case, lav shaira, that's not really left out. Daha tanale chayave lavin. The list of items in the Mishnah, I've made this point several times, are all chayave lavin, and the marriage is toifes. But with this particular set of circumstances, he's included in that. Okay, so that's not it. So then, atu chayav lavin milo katane v'hader tane. Did the Mishnah not give you some chayav lavin and then go on to other examples? What case? V'hakatani, it taught Kohen Hedyot shenas almana, v'chalal shenasak sheira. Two cases that are basically the same. So that's not a great answer either. So now the Gemara says, yeah, but you had to have those two cases. It's not really a replicative. Why? You need that case. The Ashma Inan Kirav Yehuda Omer Rav. Because of a memra of Rab Yehuda who says in the name of Rav, the Omer Rav Yehuda Omer Rav, Lo who's Haruk Sheros Shahanase Lipsulin. The daughters of, we know we've said a dozen times that a male Kohen cannot marry a halala or a divorcee. I mean, we have a list of people, a convert, there are a list of mamzeh, a list of people he cannot marry. But what about his sister, who's a kosher bas Kohen? Lo who's haruk sheros hanase lepsulin. Nowhere in the Torah does it say that a bas Kohen can't marry a halal or a convert, etc. So in order to highlight that, the Mishnah goes out of its way to bring in a, quote, unnecessary, close quote, case of the halala with the Kohen. Because a Kohenes with a halal is not forbidden. Oh, katani halal shenasik sheira, but the Mishnah taught the halal who marries a perfectly legitimate woman, the Yisrael shenasa bas Yisrael v'yeshlo ach mamzer. So it actually is replicative because it also talks about the Yisrael who marries a regular Yisrael girl and has a mamzer sibling. V'hanami lo mahader masnisahi. That also is not really repetitive. Ta'ashma'in and lav she'en shava l'kol. There is a concept of shava l'kol. I'm not allowed to eat chazer, Reuven's not allowed to eat chazer, and Mel is not allowed to eat chazer. Then and Susie and Sarah and Rivka are also not allowed to eat chazer. But there are mitzvahs that are not shava l'kol. Mitzvahs says shahazman grama are not chayav on women. Not going to a funeral, Mel and Sid, but anybody else can become a mace. So you see there are two categories of mitzvahs, some that are applicable to everyone, some that are not. So here we wanted to teach a case where it is not shava l'chol, not obligated to everybody. Kashma'in and lon, so therefore it teaches us lav shava l'kol, a case where Yibum rules apply, where it was shava l'kol. Okay, next. V'hakatani, but the Mishnah already told us Yisrael shenasa mamzeres v'yesh lo ach Yisrael. A Yisrael who marries illegitimately a mamzeres and dies, and his surviving sibling is a kosher fellow. And then it also says mamzer shenasa mamzeres v'yesh lo ach Yisrael. A mamzer who marries a mamzeres and he has a kosher brother. You should be able to infer the second from the first. Ella lav shmamina. So what we have to learn, the bottom line is that the Mishnah is incomplete. Tana v'shayer, that the Mishnah simply left out all these other kinds of cases, and it's a legitimate Mishnah. Okay, now we're going to go back to the question that should have raised eyebrows. Everybody sat there like bumps on a log. What's this notion Burr introduced that a Kohenes can marry a Gior or a Cholol, right? That's an interesting concept. I never heard it that before. Somebody should have said. Gemara is going to say the exact same thing. Gufa, here's the text. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav, Lo Huzru Ksheros Le'anaise Lepsulin. Girls who are daughters of Kahanim are not forbidden by the Torah to marry men that if they were the man and the person is a woman, that her brother would not be able to marry. Lema Messiah, can I prove it from our Mishnah? Halal shenasik sheira. It only says a male who marries a kosher woman. My love, Kohenes, it leaves out the Kohenes, so she would be fine. Oh my sheira. So what did the Mishnah mean when it says kosher? So maybe it meant kosher lekahuna, which would now include the daughter. Lo, not so. Lo Yisraelis, because the Mishnah could have meant a kosher girl, and rather than a Kohenes. Oh my, Kshera, what makes her kosher? What do we use this label kosher? Means she can marry anybody she wants. Kshera l'kahal. So, if that's the case, yesh lo ach kosher. What about the woman? The dead guy has a brother who's kosher. Nami kosher l'kahal. That would also have to mean kosher to marry anybody he wants. Miklal, dehu pasul l'kahal. So that means that the deceased brother was not kosher l'kahal by inference. Okay? Elalav Kohen. So he has to have been a Kohen. So Umikintahu Kohen. So now, since we're saying he's a Kohen, we have to infer that his sister is included, who Kohenes. So now we've backed into the possibility that the Torah does prohibit the Bas Kohen from these kinds of marriages. Midei Arya, is that really a valid proof? Ha, Kadeisa. Gemara is in one place is using a word appropriate to contextually, and in another place is using a word that's appropriate contextually, and you can't make a relation, you can't make a gezerah shava, so to speak, from those two words. Okay, so now we're still left with the possibility that a Kohenis can marry people that her brother can't. Okay, Masiv Ravin Bar Nachman. Ravin Bar Nachman challenges this whole thing. There is a pasuk that tells you which women a Kohen cannot marry, and in that you can't marry Zoina, he can't marry a divorcee, a Kohen Hedyot, okay? A convert, and it says, lo yikhu, lo yikhu. It repeats the phrase, he may not take. They shall, it's plural, they shall not take. So that repetition, Melamed sha'isha muzheres al yedei ish. So the fact that it's a plural and that it's repeated, we could make a drasha that includes his sister as well as him. Okay? So now that would now mean that we have a pasuk that says the Kohen can't marry a halala and his sister can't marry a halal. But we're going to argue with that because on the Rava, Kol heichadahu muzhar he muzheres. Mamanashach. If Reuven isn't allowed to marry Sarah for whatever reason, so Sarah isn't allowed to marry Reuven. Okay, that makes total logical sense. So that's why you have this plural repetition to rub it in that Reuven couldn't marry Sarah and Sarah can't marry Reuven. So, you notice I didn't say Susan because you could marry Susan. Okay? V'kol heicha dohu lo muzhir he lo mizharara. And if the man is not forbidden to marry the woman, this is the second lashon, then the woman is not forbidden to marry the man. There's a reciprocity. V'hamei hachanafka. But do we actually learn the notion of a Kohen and a Chalal from that pasuk alone? Mid Rebbe Yehuda Omer of Nafka, that Rebbe Yehuda says that Rav learns it differently. The Omer Rebbe Yehuda Omer Rav, V'chein Tana Debei Rebbe Yishmael, and also the person who cited the Mishnayos in the yeshiva of Rebbe Yishmael, Ish o Isha, Ki ya'asu mikol chatas ha'adam. A man or a woman who commits a sin that's universal to all people. Shava hakasav isha leish. That pasuk makes the man and the woman on the exact same level. And that level playing field applies to all the sins in the Torah. And therefore, we have this pasuk free to say that the woman should Kohenes can't marry the same category of people that her sibling, the male Kohen, can't marry. So imi hahi. But if you're going to use this pasuk, a man or a woman commits a sin, then hava mina, I should have said lot of hashava l'kol. Those are only sins that apply to everybody. Okay? Avolav she'enu shava l'kol. But when there are sins that do not apply to everybody, like a Kohen going to a funeral, women don't count in that case. So Mistama here, the Kohenes can go to a funeral. Okay? And so we'll just say one or two more words. Vahare Tuma, and that so we're talking about the rules of Tuma. The lav she'en shava l'kol, that does not apply to everybody. The time of Diksiv Rachmana, and the reason that women do not have the restriction that a Bas Kohen can go to a funeral is because the pasuk says B'nei Aharon v'lo b'nos Aharon. The pasuk explicitly states that male Kohanim may not be metame, and it excludes female Kohanim.
One thing about the Bas Kohen, is it supposed that the Bas Kohen is Mizana?
That's different.
But the main, what the definition of Don is any girl who has relations with someone that she's not supposed to marry.
I understand, but she's married. That means a woman who goes out on Friday night and sleeps over.
So you're not saying that has to be married.
They could be married, and it could be a kosher marriage, so she's not a Zayna. This is a woman who's mizana b'far Hesia, and she brings disgrace to her father. Right. I mean, if Mel's daughter marries a kosher convert who sits and steigs in yeshiva, that's not a disgrace to Mel.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, we got through that. That was very difficult material. And it's all uphill from here.
Have a good day.
Okay, I'm sorry I took so long, but